Welcome to the Chairman's Perspective Podcast. Chairman.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Chairman's Perspective, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. I am one of your two co-hosts. Okay, I'm the second banana. The first, the real banana, the star of the show is
Van Turner,
the chairman of the Shelby County Commission. My name is Lee Eric Smith, and each week we try to bring this show to you to bring you some insight into the workings of Shelby County government. And man, have we got a doozy for you today, right, Mr. Chairman?
I think you're right. We'll be discussing the living wage resolution we just passed, as well as vouchers that's progressing through the state legislature.
So we're going to be talking about $15 an hour or livable wages. Yes.
That's right.
And we're going to be talking about the education savings account, which is kind of working its way through the Tennessee legislature.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'd love to hear your perspective on all of that. So we got all of that coming up on today's episode of the Chairman's Perspective. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
The Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN! I'm Cynthia Daniels, host of Grind Set. Are you looking to start a business? Do you need tips on how to scale up? Get it on Grind Set. On this show, our guests will keep you listening. What's your Grind Set? If you happen to miss some of our episodes, make sure you check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast provider.
Grind Set on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN! The Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
And we're back on the Chairman's Perspective, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm Lee Eric Smith, one of your hosts. Of course, as always, joined by the chairman of the Shelby County Commission, Mr. Van Turner Jr. Chairman, always good to see you. How you doing today?
Doing well. You okay today?
I'm doing great. We've got a lot of show to get to. We're going to try and pack as much in as we can. And we're going to start with a lot of the developments that have gone around the living wage. We've heard a lot in our society about a minimum living wage of $15 an hour. The Shelby County Commission passed a resolution recently suggesting that it may be the accurate word for it. It's not a binding contract. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and the reasoning that goes into it?
Well, essentially, we know that if you're not able to provide for your family, you have bad consequences. And what does that mean? That means that you turn to things that are not healthy. You turn to things that may not be so good for you, your home life, or the community in order to make ends meet. Also, look at these individuals who are parents. And so if you're working 2 and 3 jobs, when are you going to have time to mentor, to rear, to love, to be there for your children?
Right.
The children don't see you. When they leave for school, you're off to work. When they get home, you're on the second or third job. And so that lack of parental involvement also translates in some instances to bad outcomes for our young people. So I think that a living wage not only allows a person, of course, to provide for himself or herself, but it also is a way that it provides a way for these family members or for these individuals to be there for their families, to raise their families, to spend time with their families. All the statistics suggest that when fathers and mothers spend time with their sons and daughters, you have better consequences in school and life, just all around. And I think a living wage does that directly as far as providing for food and providing for needed income, but indirectly in providing for a good home environment and providing for, a safe, good environment to raise their kids.
I wanted to just kind of really, for our listeners who aren't aware of this, who aren't aware of exactly what the resolution says, what it means, because somebody might be at home listening to this like, woo, I work for the county, I'm finna get $15 an hour. Mm-hmm. That's not exactly what this does, correct?
That's correct.
Can you kind of lay out, it's a resolution recommending a $15 an hour wage for public sector employees?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And essentially, what we're also suggesting is that if we can do it in the public sector and we are basically surviving on taxpayer dollars, then what can corporations do? what can the private sector do?
Like the FedExes, the FedExes, the
IPs, the AutoZones, absolutely.
Gotcha.
So essentially, we're using this as an example, if you will, to other companies in town that this is something that's doable. It's something that will help the community. It's something that you should consider as well. And so that's also an indirect benefit of what we're attempting to do with the living wage. And I think that it's the correct thing to do. When you consider inflation, we consider that the cost of everything is steadily increasing. We have to pay wages in order to keep up with those rising costs. And so, I mean, it just makes sense to do something like this. And I think that this is a suggestion and it's a nod in the right direction as it relates to paying people equally and fairly and paying people a wage that they can actually survive on.
Now, one of the things that I think about when we hear this conversation about livable wage, $15 an hour, more often than not, of course, we think about the municipalities, the city employees. You think about the big corporations. But what about the small businesses? Usually when you hear small businesses, they're always trying to control costs, trying to manage things. Labor costs come into that. That's why I think we heard a lot of pushback from people regarding Obamacare. It's like, ooh, that's going to cost me a lot of money. I'm not going to be able to do that. What would, we'll just say a livable wage, even if it's not $15 an hour, how does that come into the equation?
Well, yeah, I mean, as a small business owner, I get it. You don't want to increase wages to the extent where you go out of business, then there's no money being made, right?
Exactly.
So you have to make sure that what you're doing matches the type of business that you're in. And so to suggest that, a $15 an hour wage is something that a small business with one or two employees really hustling to make the company work, hustling to meet payroll should do. I don't think that's what we're saying. If you look to a Fortune 100 company, they're in a better state in order to do something like a living wage as opposed to the mom and pop shop. So you can't go to the store struggling to compete against Walmart and say, do what Walmart is doing, right? Because, I mean, they're not going to be able to do it or keep up with it.
They just can't compete at that level.
You just can't compete at that point. So I think that, you have to be reasonable and you have to apply it accordingly. And it's not a one size fit all. What we're saying is for our larger corporations, for our mid-sized to large corporations in town who can afford it, this is something that you should consider when you look to all the economic challenges within our community. When you look at poverty, you look at crime, you look at all these things that you don't like to think about and that you don't like to see when they, pull out all these lists every year. Then, let's do something about it and let's just not go to the charity ball once a quarter, write the check and don't think about it. And that's what, you've done. This has to be an engaged, in-depth process. We're not saying don't do the charity balls. I mean, we need those. Nonprofits need them. I'm involved in a nonprofit too. We need all the charity balls we can have.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that's just not going to cut it if we are going to make the city prosper and grow and be what we all want this city to be. We got to be much more intentional. It has to be much more robust. And I think paying individuals a living salary, a living wage is a step in the right direction towards making that happen.
You're listening to The Chairman's Perspective, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. Mr. Chairman, let me come at it from a different angle. So let's say I'm an employee, and let's say I've been working at XYZ Corporation for 10 years, and I finally got to the point where I'm earning $16 an hour. And now there's some new regulation or push, and the new guy coming in, I'm talking about the guy who just, they shook his hand about 20 minutes ago and said, congratulations on your new job, is getting ready to come in and maybe make $15 an hour. How am I supposed to feel about that? I mean, I'm joking, but I'm serious, because if you're a wage earner and, you've put in the time and the loyalty working for this company just to get to a certain point on this job, and now you're making this money, and and somebody else new comes in and they're making almost the same, there's got to be some discord that's going to happen on the job, I'm thinking.
Well, as a lawyer, I'm switched to my legal hat. That's why you have an employment handbook and you have a system where you onboard individuals and you allow for there to be a way that one can increase their wages based on the longevity that they have with the company. So again, we're just asking people to be reasonable. Surely if you're paying someone an amount of money or a salary and they've been there 5 years and now you're bringing in someone new and you're going to pay them the same thing, I mean, that's just not reasonable, right? I mean, let's just call it what it is. But what you're saying is, young man and young woman, this person who's been with me 5 years started out at 8 or 9, and now they're at 15. They had to work longer to get here, but now they're here. We're going to start you off at 10 or 11 because this is something that we're committed to, and we're going to get you to the 15 quicker. But by that same term, the person who's at 15 can perhaps have a scale where they can grow what they're doing. So, the rising tide has to lift all the boats, right? That's the saying.
I get you, yeah.
So, I mean, so I think that you just got to be reasonable. You got to know your company. You got to have a good employee handbook. You got to have a good philosophy. Happy employees make for happy companies. You got to have the love of your workers, the love of the people who, make your company operate, in order for it to effectively operate and for it to, be successful over a long period of time. If your employees are getting crapped on, they don't believe in the vision, they have no faith in you, you're dogging them out, they're going to leave. And then guess what? If you can't keep the employees, your company is going to close. So I think that just from my perspective as an employer, you have to make sure that you are doing what's right and fair by your employees, but you got to do it within reason. And so when you have an onboarding process or when you have a scale to increase the wages of persons who are already working with you, I think that we can all agree to say that if there's a way to use this living wage resolution that we've passed to inspire change for the better, hopefully that can be done. Hopefully they will take a cue from Shelby County government, and hopefully we can, little by little, incrementally increase wages for people living in this city so that they can enjoy the fruits of this city, that they can spend more time with their family, that we can have these nice, vibrant communities that we all want and desire. And so that we can become, again, the city and the county that we know we can be.
I think that in an ideal world, when we talk about, let's just play this out just a little bit further. So let's say not everybody, but let's just say all the public sector employees are now making minimum $15 an hour. So there's more money out there in the spending public. The consumer has more cash in their wallet. In an ideal world, that money gets spent more frequently, right there at the local level. I mean, you don't want to have all that money, coming in and then going right back out because it's not circulating in the community. Can you imagine any kind of incentive programs to maybe help make sure that, that extra money is floating around inside the community?
I mean, I think that we can create something. I don't know of anything in place now, but if we can grant pilots and TIFs and TDZs, as we've discussed before, then most certainly we can grant some sort of an incentive to make this process a reality. So in other words, as chair of the commission, I'm open to, the options. If we have thought leaders, if we have think tanks, if we have individuals with plans, definitely reach out to us at the county. We're at 2221,000. I'll be happy to sit down and meet with you. We don't have all the answers, but we are open to strategies which, again, would further develop what we're attempting to do as a progressive, forward-thinking, forward-moving county. I was just so thrilled that I got to sit down, and you wouldn't believe this, on his birthday. This would have been former mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson's 81st birthday.
Wow.
I finally got a chance to sit down and look at his documentary on Netflix.
Okay.
And he has such a spirit of giving back, of creating opportunity, of being creative in what he was doing with Atlanta city government. And I think we have to all be inspired by the Maynard Jackson story, put on our thinking caps and think of ways to, again, increase wages for what we're doing, create opportunities for what we're giving people here in Shelby County, because at the end of the day, Atlanta is great, not because of any one company that's there. Atlanta is not great because of CNN. It's not great solely because of Delta or for any of the other great companies that are there. Atlanta is great because it was the city too busy to hate. It was the city that said, we're going to put aside black and white, and we're going to make sure that everyone gets a piece of this pie. And look what it has turned into. Look what it did for Atlanta. So I'm merely suggesting to Memphis and Shelby County that if we adopt that same philosophy here, if we really put our intentions, if we really put our money, if we really put our companies on the line in order to make sure that we're going to make this the city and the county that we want it to be, then it would be easy. So offering incentives in order to give living wages to individuals within this community is something that I would champion if it's the right plan and we can do it and it's legal.
No, we absolutely.
I'll be up to considering such, those options.
We absolutely do not want the chairman of the Shelby County Commission doing anything illegal.
Yes,
that brings us to the close of this first segment. When we come back, we've got more with the chairman about education savings accounts. A lot going on with that at the state legislature level, and that legislation is moving quickly. We'll talk more with the chairman about how that's affecting or how that could affect Shelby County when we come back on The Chairman's Perspective.
The Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Jazz, America's own original musical art form. When did it start? Who were and are some of the major players? How do you distinguish what kind of jazz you're listening to? We talk about the great and lesser-known artists, songs and tunes, the instruments, and the social impact jazz has had on world culture since its beginning at the start of the 20th century.
Riffin' on jazz on the KUDZUKIAN Network. KUDZUKIAN!
The Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Welcome back to The Chairman's Perspective. I'm here with my co-host, Lee Eric Smith.
What's happening, y'all?
And now we're about to change the subject and topic to the education savings account issue, which is at the state level, otherwise known as ESA. And so, Lee, one of the items before the General Assembly now is the governor's proposal for a voucher plan. And of course, he calls it an education savings account. And basically what he's doing with these vouchers is that he's setting aside money to allow students to attend private schools with this money that he is taking out of the public education system.
This sounds like vouchers.
That's exactly what it is.
That's okay. I was wondering because, things will change the name.
Right.
But I was wondering about that. I wanted to know from your perspective, though, Mr. Chairman, how do you see this affecting poor kids and specifically, brown and black kids, if it is able to pass? Because it's been through one of the committees and now it's headed to another committee. It looks like it's fast-tracked, if you know what I mean.
Yes, sir. So I think that this is more than just an issue for the urban core of Memphis, black and brown kids. This is an issue that's for the entire county. The last go around when vouchers were on the agenda, the Republicans and the Suburbans pushed the suburban school districts pushed this issue, and they were out front before we were on it. Shelby County schools, meaning that you just had the Millington, Arlington, and Lakeland school districts formed. You just had Bartlett, Collierville, and Germantown school districts formed. And so essentially they were concerned about these funds being diverted from their school systems.
Right.
Here again, the same scenario. These suburban municipal school districts are against this program because they want to protect the student population of these schools. And we have joined right in with them because we're concerned about the student population at our schools. Now, if this was something which would pay the entire tuition for these young men and women, then perhaps you can see it.
So
that's a lot of money.
Right. So where the disconnect is so let's say you're a poor kid, and let's say somehow you're able to get one of these, able to have an education savings account or whatever, be able to get access to those funds. At issue is whether or not, if that takes off part of the tuition for attending said private school, whether or not the parent would be able to make up the difference, and if they can't, is their kid stuck with a bad education?
Right, and so that's the issue. It's not paying the full tuition, so that parent will still have to come up with the rest of the money, and so it still is an issue as far as having the ability to attend that school and not having the financial challenges of attending the school. And while you're trying this out, while you are experimenting, while you are testing this out, as the state, seems to do in other things as well, you're hurting traditional public education.
Okay.
And so I think that it's bad. We passed a resolution Monday which said send it to a study committee at least. But it appears to be on a fast track, and it appears to have momentum. And I just think it's bad for traditional, schools. I think it's bad for traditional public school systems. And so hopefully there will be a change in momentum. They will take a further look at this and maybe do something else with it, because I think that the voucher bill will end up harming traditional public school systems.
I've always wondered about this because we talk about, it's not the first time in American society we've heard conversations about education vouchers and whether or not that's going to take money out of, the public school system and reroute it to other places, and whether or not poor children are going to suffer because of that. I've wondered, can you imagine any scenario where, say, a poor kid is able to get a hold of, one of these vouchers? Is there a scenario where this type of system could work for, not just work, but maybe even work extremely well for, poor kids, whether they're in urban centers or in rural places?
I don't know. That's something that we would have to kind of study, because what would happen to the traditional public school systems in those rural settings if these young people started, in droves going to these private schools with these voucher bills?
Some people would say, you have smaller classroom size, which, helps improve education outcomes. I mean, I'm just, coming up with things off the top of my head, but I always wonder about these solutions, because sometimes it seems like people kind of go back to the traditional script of, I'm on whatever side of political aisle, and therefore I am automatically against vouchers or these types of savings accounts, without really stopping to consider, okay, how could we, work this thing, so to speak, so that it is good for not just, the rich kids and their families, but it's also good for the poor kids.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. And I mean, the whole history of private schools, especially in the South, is a bit troubling when you kind of understand how we got to where we got to. Now, I was on the board of a very good private school, and I enjoyed the experience. I learned a lot about this particular school, and it was good. But I mean, and I think they were trying to correct some of those things. But
and you're kind of referring to, let's just go ahead and keep it real. You're talking about some of the schools where that popped up in response to desegregation.
Integration.
I grew up in Holly Springs, Mississippi, not far from here, at the time that school in Marshall County was called Marshall Academy.
Right.
So we never played Marshall Academy in sports or anything, but we always, pardon me, we always knew that school was there and why it existed. And we don't want to create that circumstance again, right?
No, we don't. And we don't want to use taxpayers' dollars to fund that. We don't want to use taxpayers' dollars to fund it. And so, and I just think it's a real issue using public dollars to fund these private schools. I think it's just a real problem. I think it's just problematic. And you're listening to the Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if this will hurt big districts like Shelby County, Jackson, Madison County, Knox, Metro Davidson, the ASD, all of that, how can do voters still have any recourse here if you're in one of these areas that could be adversely affected by this? Is there anything the average voter can do to slow it down or stop it?
I mean, outside of unelecting your state rep or state senator, perhaps not much you can do at this point. And I don't know how many students will really avail themselves of these vouchers. I can see it happening probably a little more quickly in the suburban districts than I would see it happening sort of in the Shelby County School District. But we'll just have to see what happens. I'm very concerned. I think that there is just so much that comes against traditional public schools. Everything is wrong if you were to hear some people, and everything needs fixing. And so there's just a dismantling of what we have come to know as traditional public education. And, sure, there are problems, but the dismantling of traditional public education is probably not the right way to address the issues.
Agreed. I would just push back a little bit, though, and say, even if we're not dismantling, and I'm absolutely not for dismantling public education, but it sure seems like it's under a lot of stress and under a lot of pressure. And a lot of that pressure comes from the teachers and the education system having to do so much. As you know, a lot of times we hear educators complaining that they have to spend so much time disciplining students that they don't really have time to get into the education. Some of that has to do with the fact that you got one adult and maybe a teacher's assistant who's trying to manage a class of 30 or 40, 8-year-olds. And I can't manage my own 18-month-old kid. I don't see managing a whole room of that. What I'm getting at is I could see a scenario where, and I don't know how plausible it is, but if there were a way for some of the classroom size in the public school classrooms to kind of shrink a little bit, if it were able to go down to 20, and some of the students who were in those classes are in, let's just, I don't know, I'm making this up, but let's just say the little red schoolhouse model in their neighborhoods where you have a smaller classroom and those savings accounts were able to go into those types of neighborhoods in that scenario. I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine if it seems if we can't get a law to go the way that we think it should go, how can we make it work for us anyway?
Yeah, I think those are good points. When you take the money away from the schools and the student population drops, you're unable to have the programs that you would normally have just because you need some density. You need some numbers in order to justify having a program. So are you going to teach, calculus 2, for instance, to one person? I mean, you would need to justify having academic programs, and you would need these classes to be robust and full in order to justify having the teacher with that type of expert qualifications to teach such a class, because that particular teacher may require a higher salary. It's more competitive to get the Calculus 2 teacher in. And in order to justify paying the salary to the Calculus 2 teacher, she needs more than just one student. And when you get into that smaller setting, I think you just have an issue because the Calculus 2 students have all used the vouchers to go to the private school, and they're no longer at this traditional neighborhood public school.
And you don't have calculus being taught at that school, which is something that you want. You don't want to take those types of programs out.
Right. And that leads you to the other issue. Are these young people able to compete if you take calculus out of the school period? And the answer is no.
That's a good point, Mr. Chairman. We're running out of time, but I want to get to the perspective of a couple of other angles from this before we get out of here. Namely, we've talked about it from the state legislature level and all of that, but going all the way to the grassroots, are you hearing anything about this from parents, from teachers? What are you hearing on the street in terms of reaction to this?
Yeah, my wife is an educator. She's a guidance counselor. I mean, if we were to poll the teachers unions, they would be against it. I think they are against this. we just have to be very careful about experimenting too much. You know, it seems like every new idea that comes out, let's just go to Shelby County schools and try it. You know, we have, the most charter schools here in the county. We have
most charter schools in the entire state?
In the entire state, yeah, are here in this county.
Wow.
The ASD schools, the most are here in the state, are here in the county. And so I just think that, we just got to give our babies a shot. And part of that is just being consistent. The school is probably the most consistent thing that some of these young ones have from day to day.
Yeah. And
here we are changing, amending. Every time you look at something new, somebody has read a book, let's try this. And it's our black babies. It's our kids who are being affected. And, let's stop experimenting so much. Let's give some consistency. Let's have faith in our teachers. Let's try things which are good and new, but let's phase those things in over time and not just keep dumping on these urban school districts, trying something out that you read in the book somewhere or that you did your dissertation on when you were in school. We're affecting human lives. We are affecting an entire community, and all these teachers and educators are saying, give us a shot and stop changing it up on us every day. Stop testing us to death. Stop, taking 2 and 3 hours out of my schedule doing all this crazy paperwork. I think that's what they're saying. Now, I'm not an educator, but I listen.
Married to one.
But I listen very well, and so I think that's what the streets are saying, as my friend would say. What are the streets saying? I think that's what they're saying.
And the chairman has spoken. Another excellent show, Mr. Chairman. Always enjoy having this time with you. When we come back, we'll put a nice little bow on this show. Don't go away. We'll be right back here on The Chairman's Perspective, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Chairman. The Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
R&R on Sports is proud to be on Sirius XM.
So what's R&R stand for?
Real talk and relevant sports issues.
It's racial and relative. We're brothers from the South. We can relate.
R&R on Sports on the KUDZUKIAN Network. The Chairman's Perspective on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
But Brother Smith, I really enjoyed this program. We talked about a living wage. We also talked about vouchers, and we really hit on education. And I know we talked and we hit the charter schools and all of that. I'm a fan of options, but I just think we got to have options which are reasonable and which tie in to what the community wants. What do you think?
One of the things that I always get concerned about when we talk about education is, whether or not it gets politicized too much. I mean, the reality to me is what the parent out in, the affluent parent out in Collierville wants isn't that much different than what the parent who's not doing so well in the hood wants. Everybody wants a good education for their kids, so they want their kids to be safe, so they can go on and live and prosper. And so I just hope that this situation resolves in a way that's good for all the kids, because what's good for all the kids is good for Shelby County.
Absolutely. And as I state all the time, the best days for Shelby County and Memphis are ahead of us. We've hit our stride. I think things are going very well. And the youth that we're educating, that we're talking about, that's going to be the key to ensuring the success of this great city and this great county. So I think this has been a wonderful episode. Hopefully the listeners will agree and come back to listen to more of the Chairman's Perspective right here on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and we'll see you next week.
The Chairman's Perspective Podcast. Executive producer, Shelby County Commission's Van Turner. Hosted by Lee Eric Smith. Recorded at KUDZUKIAN Studios. Directed, produced, and distributed by KUDZUKIAN.